What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. If you want to skip this little opening section, you can go ahead and skip to 48 seconds. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for all the support you've been showing the channel lately. If you guys are enjoying these daily uploads, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, but only if you feel so inclined after watching. My favorite part of making true scary stories is knowing what you guys think of the video and the stories therein. So if you have any thoughts as you're watching, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I like reading through all of them. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Once you're engaged, a wedding has a lot of prerequisites. To name a few, wedding bands, venues, food, dresses, suits, guest lists, rehearsal dinners, and bachelor and bachelorette parties. Preparing for all of this is one of the most exciting and simultaneously stressful times of your life. For me in particular, it was made a lot easier with the support of family and friends. Everything had gone pretty smoothly thus far. We picked our wedding venue after the second tour. The venue had a florist, DJ, and food and bakery services all lined up as well, so we didn't have to look outside for any of that, if we didn't want to. I think we used most of their services. Maybe only went outside for the flowers or the DJ maybe. The wedding date was rapidly approaching. My friends and I decided to take a trip to a small beach town on the East Coast for a low-key bachelor party. The plan was mostly to hang out and cook some stuff on the grill and spend a long time at the beach, maybe visit a local brewery or a bar at night or something. We rented out a house on the beach for 2 nights, and everyone pitched in to grab food, drinks, and all the other supplies we'd need. It was a perfect getaway, and an opportunity to hang out with all of my friends who had since moved out to different parts of the country. On the first night, we decided to go out to a club. It was a place a few of the guys had been to before, and came highly recommended. They featured a mixture of live music and DJs throughout the night. I'm not the biggest drinker myself, so clubs and bars aren't usually my scene. But this place made it easy to just grab a drink and enjoy the music. Before I knew it, we were taking shots and having an absolute blast. About an hour before closing, I was hanging around the bar with a few of my buddies. They were still grabbing drinks, but I had cut myself off. I walked over to see if they could grab me some water while they were getting their drinks, and I froze for a moment. I swore that directly on the other side of the bar was someone I knew who all called Jess for this story. The person immediately turned away when they noticed me. I couldn't really tell for sure if it was them. I bumped into my buddy Brad and said, "Hey, is that Jess over there?" He looked over in that direction and threw his arms up. He took a sip of his drink. For some context, Jess and I used to be dating, and we had a very difficult breakup. It led to her harassing me quite a bit. I hadn't seen or even thought about her in over 7 years now. I shook it off pretty quickly. Surely it was the alcohol playing with my eyes. The next morning, a couple of my buddies and I got up and took a walk around town and down to the beach. I always felt better after getting up and getting some fresh air after a night of drinking. When we got back to the house, there was a 6-pack of beer and a letter attached to the front door. I had Joe open the letter and see what it was. All it said was, "I hope you had the best time. You deserve it." He flipped the note around and it had what looked like a lipstick kiss on it. I asked if this was a joke, and he said he didn't know anything about it. I went inside and pulled my best man aside. "Hey, do you know anything about this thing?" He assured me he had no idea about any of it either, and that no one besides me or the other 2 guys had even gone outside that morning. I told him I thought I'd seen Jess at the bar the night before. I wasn't sure, but this note was starting to freak me out a bit. I was always a super anxious person already, and I really didn't want to run into her. He told me to relax and not worry about it. He would ask around and see if it was one of the other guys or something. The rest of the trip went off without a hitch, and we had a blast. We had an absolutely fantastic wedding, and I couldn't have asked for a better day. 3 to 4 months after my wedding, I was catching up with my best man, who was preparing to get married the following summer. We started talking about his plans and what he was thinking for a bachelor party, and then he quickly switched the conversation. "Hey, I need to tell you something, but promise you won't be mad, okay?" I replied, "Yeah, sure, I won't be mad." I figured he was going to tell me he had chosen someone else as his best man, which wouldn't have made me mad. He said, "Remember your bachelor party when we got that weird letter?" I said, "Yeah, not really concerned yet. Was that you?" He took a deep breath and said, "No. But if you remember when everyone left for the beach to grab one of the volleyball spots, I stayed back to hang out and shower and grab some breakfast. When I was getting ready to head down to the beach and meet up with all of you, I went outside and saw Jess there. She was trying to break into one of the windows." I felt my heart beating, and I said, "What?" at the top of my lungs. His head was down, and he continued, "Yeah, she was trying to get inside. When I yelled at her, she stormed right over and asked to know where you were, said that she needed to talk to you. She went on this whole rant about how no one else deserved to be with you, and that you two should still be together. She was out of her mind, man. Her eyes were wide, her hair was all over the place. It looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Basically, I told her if she didn't leave, I was calling the cops, and I told her to not ever come around you or your fiancé again." I was floored. I didn't even know what to say. I felt thankful my friend had handled the situation, but I was also nervous and anxious another incident would occur. I now live in a different state from where my wife and I got married, and I don't get to see friends and family as much anymore, but we're very excited about the life we're building here. It also gives me hope that I'll never run into her again. I'm sort of the outcast of my family. My brother became a lawyer, my cousins all became doctors and nurses, even college professors. Then there's me. I dropped out of film school during my second year, and I now make my living bartending. Due to the nature of my job, I meet a nice number of questionable individuals. For the most part, though, they're fairly harmless. One night early in the summer a few years back, I went to my parents' house for dinner. The entire family was there, and it quickly turned into the Let's Lecture Shannon show. They played all the classic hits like "Why Can't You Be More Like Your Brother?" and "When Are You Going to Find Someone to Settle Down With? Do you know your childbearing years don't last forever?" Oh, you know, all that stuff every child wants to hear from their parents or the family during the get-together. I was pretty annoyed, and it showed when I got to work that evening. I was venting to a co-worker when a nice-looking man who I didn't recognize as a regular spoke up and said in a sort of deep and rugged tone, "Sounds like your parents don't really get you, huh? I can tell just by looking at you that you're a free spirit. You play by your own rules. You give off this unique energy." Yeah, believe it or not, that stupid line worked on me for some reason. Maybe it was because this guy was so good looking. I don't know. I continued to talk with him for a while, and we ended up talking all night long. I closed the bar and we went back to my place for the night. Had a few more drinks. I was actually really into this guy. Even though I'd just met him, there was a real connection. When we woke up in the morning, he made me scrambled eggs and suggested something crazy. He said it with such confidence in that deep, sexy voice of his. "Hey, why don't we elope?" I knew that was crazy, but Vegas was only 3 hours away. I know this is crazy, but Vegas is only 3 hours away. You can tell your parents you met a guy and now you're married. This guy knew exactly what chords to hit with me. I knew in my stomach this was a horrible idea, since I didn't know anything about this guy at all. But I wasn't thinking that way at the time. I was thinking about getting back at my parents. To me, it was just a marriage. Like, people get divorced all the time, right? So if it doesn't work out, I could just do the same. I agreed and called into work for my night shift. Right after breakfast, we got into the car and started our trip to Vegas. It was crazy, but I was excited about this. We talked about getting married, what we wanted to do, things like that. We were an hour away from Vegas when I realized he hadn't told me anything about himself. Where he was from, where he was living, I didn't even know his name. That pit in my stomach grew bigger and bigger the closer we got to Vegas. I asked him what his last name was. He just smiled and said, "You'll find out soon enough. Don't you worry about that." I still don't know why I was going along with this at this point. I think the idea of throwing it in my parents' faces was my real driving force. We weren't far from Vegas now, when I noticed that he'd gotten off the highway at a random exit that I didn't recognize. I told him we needed to stay on to get to the place we were going, and he insisted this was a shortcut to a special place. It was cheaper and very nice. He knew the girl who ran it, apparently. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know anything about Vegas, but I was pretty sure there was not some secret side entrance into the actual city. I mean, maybe there was and I didn't know, but I didn't think so. Wherever we were now looked like the middle of the desert. There was hardly anything on the road. It looked like a scene from Mad Max. I started to grill him with questions. What did he do for a living? How did he know about this place? Was he sure he was making the right decision? He seemed to be very dismissive. He just kept saying stuff like, "I love you, baby. I know there's a connection. Trust me. There's a reason the universe brought us together." Finally, I started to come to my senses. I sobered up, as they say. I was worried it was too late. It was becoming clear this dude was up to something. I told him I really needed to use the restroom, and it was an emergency. He said I needed to wait until we got there. I basically begged him to stop, which he finally did. I went into the bathroom and called my mom right away. I apologized for what I was doing and told her I didn't feel safe. She didn't judge me or insult me or anything. She just told me to turn on my phone's location and try to stay where I was as long as I could. She would head out to where I was. She said if things started going south, to text her a single letter and she'd alert the police right away. When I got back in the car, I could tell something was off. He started demanding I tell him what was wrong. I stuck to my story and told him I was fine. I was just a bit tired. I told him I would be excited once we finally arrived at the wedding chapel. After 45 minutes of driving, we eventually pulled up to what looked like an old garage or something. Obviously, I was confused. I asked why we were there. He told me some wild story about how this place was like a secret location to get married, like a speakeasy for elopers. I got out and glanced at my surroundings. There was literally nothing in sight other than desert. I asked if Vegas was close by, and he said it was 5 miles away. He told me to head inside. He wanted to grab a suit out of the trunk or something. I walked over to the door of the garage and looked back at him digging through the trunk. I noticed he had a duffel bag. Before I went in, I heard a noise coming from the other side of the door. There was a small window next to it, so I peeked through. Crouched over with the hood was some person hiding just out of sight. I looked back at my lovely groom-to-be. He was still digging for something. I texted my mom the one letter as she suggested and ran to the back of the building. I hid behind some random barrels. From my vantage point, I was able to see him make his way to the door. He kept looking in both directions. When he opened the door, I could hear the men speaking, but I couldn't really tell what they were saying. Seconds later, he ran outside and started to call out my name. Whoever the other guy was said they needed to leave right now. I saw them both run off to his car and drive off in a hurry. leaving a gigantic dust cloud behind. I stayed put right where I was for a little over an hour until eventually 2 police cars showed up. I gave them a report of what happened, and we waited for my parents, who gave me a big hug when they arrived. I told the police everything I knew and what type of car it was. I hadn't really got many details. I knew it was a gray 4-door car, I think maybe a Ford. I gave the description of the guy as well, told them everywhere we had gone and hoped a camera might have picked us up. Unfortunately, those guys were never caught. I didn't work at that bar for much longer. I started working for my brother shortly after, actually. Whenever I see a gray car slow down anywhere near me, my heart still stops. I don't know exactly what was going to happen to me, but I'm grateful I came to my senses when I did, because if I had walked into that garage, I may have never been seen again. This happened to me just yesterday. I was attending a concert with my twin sister, who is 19, and my older sister, who is 24. The concert was in Los Angeles, California, at the Echoplex venue. To give some context about the location, it's located right by a place called Skid Row. This area is full of homeless people and various drug addicts. It's not the best location, is all I'm saying. Since the concert was located in a bad area, my overprotective mom drove us there. She also brought a taser and pepper spray with her, just in case something happened. The concert was supposed to start at 7, and there were no assigned seats at all, just standing room only. My sisters and I wanted to get there at least 3 hours before, to wait in line so we could get the best spots to stand at. To describe the layout of the venue, the entrance was located in an alleyway. It was pretty evident we were the first fans there, so we went through the alley and pulled up to the entrance. We asked one of the security guards where they wanted us to start the line. He told us he wanted us to start on the sidewalk and pointed to the entrance of the alleyway. We made our way there, and we knew we would be waiting for quite a while. We had brought some lawn chairs and set them up along the sidewalk. My mom, being street smart and overprotective, didn't want to just drop us off and leave, so she stayed in line and waited with us. As we were sitting along the small brick wall just outside of the alleyway, I turned to my left. There was a tattoo parlor with a table and some chairs out front. Half an hour passed by, and a handful of fans had arrived to wait in line as well. Now, remember, we were in California, and the weather gets real warm. We knew that smaller concert venues could get packed and create a lot of body heat. Because of this, my sisters and I were wearing jean shorts and thin clothing. It's relevant to the story. After waiting for a while, I looked towards my left, where the tables were in front of that tattoo parlor. I noticed a short, heavy-set man wearing a hat, staring right at where me and my sisters were sitting. It did creep me out a little bit, but I tried to ignore it. About 20 minutes later, a skinny man with black curly hair sat down next to the guy in the hat. I noticed that this guy was clearly under the influence of some sort of drugs. The men didn't appear to say anything to each other. It looked like they could be related, though. This made me all the more aware. I turned to my sisters and warned them, saying to be careful about those 2 guys at the table. They were acting very suspiciously. I tried looking forward to the concert, but I was weirded out now. I noticed the skinny man was just looking at me over and over from the table, giving me this dead-eyed stare. He began to walk past the entrance of the alleyway, right past us a couple of times. Every time he passed by, I held my breath. Even the short guy with the hat would get up from his seat and stand right behind us. He was talking with someone on the phone. It became very apparent they both had their eye on us for some reason. We kept a close eye as well and remained cautious of them. We had one more hour before the doors of the venue opened. At one point, the skinny man walked past us and stopped in front of my older sister. After he was done staring at her, he moved on to me. He stood right in front of me and began rubbing his stomach and making noises as if he was eating. He started staring at my legs. I was disgusted. I wanted to yell at him and cuss him out. My mind was racing, trying to think of what to do. I knew that people who are under the influence could be very reactive to sudden movements. I decided to stay still, like it was a scene from Jurassic Park and he was a T-Rex or something. My mom was standing right next to me. She'd grabbed the taser, ready to zap him. She kept telling him to leave us alone and back up. What was alarming was that he wasn't responding at all. Finally, my mom yelled for security, and the man left and retreated to the tables across the street. The short man had also returned with him. He was still staring at me with this big smile. When I told my mom he was still looking at us, she looked right at him. His eyes changed from my direction to my mom's. His expression instantly went from smiling to furious, a look of pure hatred because she'd gotten in his way. If you're wondering why no one in line tried to help us, most of the people who were there were also women who were just as scared of these guys as we were. When we told security about it, they said they couldn't do anything because the line was outside the venue and they were only required to protect the inside. Not even 5 minutes later, the short, chubby man with the hat came over and asked one of the employees what time the event ended. After that, he left. This terrified me because he obviously didn't know anyone who was going to the concert, and he didn't have a ticket either, so why did he need to know what time the event ended? My mom told me she would wait outside the venue for us and to text her before leaving. Finally, it was time for the concert to start. The doors opened. As my sisters and I were walking through the alley to get to them, my mom later told me the skinny man and short man were smiling and watching us walk in. As we got inside, the thought and fear of those men stayed in the back of my head for a while, but eventually I forgot about it and was able to enjoy my time there. My mom texted my sister and told her that she'd called my uncle, who's a correctional officer. He decided to make the 1-hour drive and wait outside the venue for us with my mom. This made us feel a lot safer. When the concert ended, we began to walk outside. My mom and uncle were waiting right there. As I looked past them, I saw a car. The short, chubby man was in the front, and it was filled with other men in the back seat, just waiting there. My mom and uncle told us to walk the other direction, and we did. We made it to our car safely and drove home. I don't know what the two men's intentions were. All I know is they were not good. I'm glad we made it out safely. I really don't like my family. Now, I know that sounds horrible, but I just never got along with my parents, and by extension, my entire extended family. We were just very different people with very different ideologies. When I was 18, I moved away for about 10 years. I just moved back a year ago, and I've been slowly rekindling my relationship with my family. As an adult, I've realized we can have different ideologies and still love one another. Family is family after all. I'm fortunate enough to have any family left at all. Last year was my first birthday back in my hometown, ever since I turned 18. It was an experience, to say the least. My parents decided to throw me a surprise birthday party, which already lost points in my book. I appreciated the gesture, of course, but I'm not a big fan of surprises. My parents decided to invite my entire extended family, many of my aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in over 10 years now. Honestly, I was more surprised by the turnout of the party than the actual surprise itself. After the initial shock, I did start to have a good time. It was nice being able to talk to some family that I hadn't seen in many years. We talked about football, jobs, life. It was becoming clear to me that I just needed to grow up and move away for a little while in order to have a good time with these people. Things got a little bit weird when I talked to my great aunt Angela. She was one of the few aunts that I had liked before I left. We would talk about Adam Sandler movies on holidays when I was a kid. I thought that was so cool back then, since the rest of the family was so uptight. Aunt Angela was not doing so great though. She had dementia or something along those lines. I don't know exactly which medical condition it was really. I can say that it did really warp her brain though. When I tried to talk to her, she looked angry, like really angry. I kept trying to lightheartedly kid around with her, but she had that mean look carved onto her face. One of my uncles eventually pulled me aside and told me that she was really sick. I shouldn't take her cold shoulder personally. I shrugged it off and continued mingling at the party. A little while later, I was eating something. My great aunt approached me out of nowhere and yelled at me in an angry and nervous voice. "I know you're not my nephew. I demand to know what you've done with him." I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. I think at that moment I had made some stupid joke, but her stone-cold expression didn't change at all. I just kinda walked away a little bit scared. I wanted to get as far away from her as possible. It dawned on me when I walked away that she hadn't seen me since I was much younger. I moved away at 18, but I don't think she had seen me for years even before that. Whatever condition she had, she couldn't process that I had aged throughout all that time. As the party continued, she kept staring at me. It was uncomfortable, but I tried my best to get over it. As the party guests started to thin out, I decided to use the restroom we had there. The bathroom was in the back of my parents' house. You had to go down a long hallway, and it was the last room on the left. After I did my business, I opened the door. I thought I could hear sniffling. It sounded like someone was crying. Across the hall from the bathroom was an old bedroom. It had been my brother's growing up, but now it was just a guest room. On the twin bed, sitting on the edge, was my great aunt. She was crying. I probably should have grabbed my mom. I went into the room and tried to console her. I put my hand on her back and asked her what was wrong. She looked at me with these huge tear-filled eyes and said, "My nephew is dead, and you're the monster who took him away." Before I could even react at all, she pulled out this small pair of black tweezers and started to jab them into my neck. I yelled and jumped back. I heard the tweezers hit the ground. I grabbed my neck and barged out of the spare room. I started making my way down the hall back to the kitchen. Then the saddest and most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me happened. She ran out of the room and started chasing me down the hallway like a woman possessed. I had no idea how to react to this. She was an elderly woman, but she was screaming and cackling, holding those tweezers above her head like a soldier with a sword. I ran into the kitchen with blood trickling down my neck, screaming that my aunt wanted to kill me. Thankfully, my mom and uncle restrained her. At this point, she was on some other planet. Her eyes had gone to the back of her head, and she was yelling about avenging her nephew. Nobody could tell her that I was her nephew. It was really sad, but she just couldn't accept it for some reason. In hindsight, this story is infinitely more sad than scary. She ended up passing away several months after this incident. I just can't imagine losing that much of my brain. It's a nightmare for me to even think about. I'm lucky that she was only able to find tweezers. She gave me a pretty nice gash on the neck in that short time. Can you imagine if she'd actually found a knife or some other sharp object? She literally would have killed me in that split second. I told my parents no more surprise parties after that. I'm still getting over the shock of last year's one. I work at Dunkin' Donuts. This is something that happened several months ago now. I've had the job for almost a year. The location I work at isn't usually that busy. Most of the time, it's actually pretty empty. I guess it's not in the most populated area. We do get a decent amount of people during the morning rush, though. That's when a lot of people stop by for coffee and donuts. Other than that, we were pretty much dead silent for most of the day. On the day of this story, I was working a shift that started in the morning and ended in the late afternoon. I got there, I think, at about 10 a.m., where the somewhat busiest time of the day had already passed by. I was working with two other co-workers. Shortly after I arrived, one of them left, and by 2 o'clock, I was all by myself now. I was standing behind the counter with no other customers inside when a man walked in. He was a larger guy with blonde-colored hair and a big old beard, which was the same color. After entering, he walked up to the counter right in front of me. I said hello to the man, and he said he would have an everything bagel with cream cheese. Unfortunately, we had run out of bagels that day. We likely wouldn't have any more in until the next morning. After I told the man we didn't have any more everything bagels, I thought he would order something else. Instead, he said okay and walked back out. Another hour or so went by. We got a couple customers in that time, but not very many. The same man then walked in again. When I realized it was him, I found that a little bit interesting. He walked up to the counter and ordered the exact same thing as he'd just done before. I told him we still didn't have any of that kind of bagel. Without saying a word or even showing any kind of emotion at all, he turned around and left again. Now I was starting to find this more than a little bit strange. I didn't know what this guy's situation was, but it only started to get weirder from there. About 30 minutes after, the man came back. Exact same as the first 2 times he walked in, approached me, and asked for the same order. I told him we still didn't have it, and wouldn't for the rest of the day. I asked the man why he kept coming in here and ordering the same thing when he knew we didn't have it anymore. The man said he'd never been in there before. He said this was his first time. Honestly, I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling at all. He was dead serious. I told him he had been here 2 times before and ordered the same thing. He claimed it was not him. I was about to tell him that he had indeed come before, but as I was starting to talk, he turned around and left again, completely ignoring me. Well, this was really strange. By that time, we wouldn't really be busy anymore at all, so I kept doing my own thing. Things were slow as expected. For the next hour or so, we only had 3 or 4 people come in. It was at that point that the man returned. I spotted him at the window this time. I just remember noticing the man outside looking in. He had his hands up against the glass, and his face was pressed really close. He was staring in with these wide, bulging eyes. It was really creepy, to be honest with you. He just kept staring and staring. After a while, I waved at him. Nothing happened, though. He didn't move or react at all. This went on for the longest time. I thought about going outside and seeing what he wanted, but decided not to. As time continued on, the expression on his face got angrier and angrier. After about 10 minutes, he just walked away. I tried to see where he was going, if he'd driven here or what, but he walked around the side of the building and disappeared out of my sight. It seemed as though he was going on to another property nearby. I was so weirded out by the whole thing. I still don't know what happened, and ever since that day, I haven't seen the man again. I don't really like kids. I know that's blunt and very to the point, but it's the truth. I've always had bad luck with children. I'm getting older now, and I need to decide within the next few years if I want to have kids of my own. I spent the first half of the year trying to spend as much time with my brother and my nephew as possible, just to spend some more time around children. A few months back, I got an opportunity to babysit one of my coworkers' children. A year ago, I would have turned this down instantly, but because I was trying to be more open-minded about children, I agreed to watch the kid for a few hours, not to mention I could use the extra money. I was relieved to find out the child wasn't a baby like my nephew. He was 7 years old and loved playing games. This was a fun age to interact with, at least for me. We played outside for a while and nothing seemed weird or out of the ordinary. It started to rain though, so instead of getting all wet and muddy, we decided to go inside. The kids started to get a little bit moody when we went in, so I tried to think of some games I liked when I was that age. I thought about hide and seek. That was my favorite game when I was a child. I even played it with my friends when we were in high school, from time to time. Needless to say, he loved the idea. I was surprised when he said he'd never played it before. I had to explain the rules to him, and once he understood the game, he couldn't wait to try it out. I tried to make the game seem like a type of adventure, just to give it some extra flair. We played for a few rounds, but eventually he started to yell at me. I was hiding in spots that were too easy to find. His next turn to seek, I went up to his bedroom and hid underneath his twin bed. Not the greatest hiding spot, but hey, he's a 7-year-old kid. What am I gonna do, not let him win? I heard him shout, "Ready or not, here I come!" I could hear him running back and forth downstairs. I even heard him giggling. I was happy he seemed to be having so much fun. A few seconds later, I happened to turn my head, and that's when I noticed the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. I happened to glance out the window and happened to see some messed up looking lady just standing there right outside of it looking in. I instinctively gasped and covered my mouth. The lady didn't seem to have noticed me though. She was just standing in front of the window not doing anything. Then she leaned over and cupped her hands against it, trying to look around inside. I was terrified she was going to notice me because of the angle, but thankfully she didn't seem to. I started to freak out. I didn't want the kid to walk into the room and be scared of this woman. Everything inside me was telling me to grab the kid and leave right now, but I was paralyzed in that moment. The nightmare just kept getting worse and worse. This woman started to attack the window, clearly trying to get it open. I quickly ruled out the possibility of it being someone familiar. She kept doing the classic look over your shoulder, like she knew what she was doing was wrong. The woman gave the window a few more hard budges, but the window wasn't moving at all. She looked both ways, and then she took off. I just about jumped out of my skin, because not even 10 seconds later, the little boy jumped onto the floor and shouted out, "I found you!" I shrieked so loud the poor kid jumped in surprise. I didn't know if the woman was still outside, or even worse, trying to break in somewhere else. I was trying to think quickly on my feet. I decided to take the kid out for some ice cream since we were in the middle of summer. I ran to the garage and opened the door and drove as fast and as far as I could away from that place. I didn't see anyone outside as I pulled away, but I didn't have time to look that far in depth. I know I should have probably just called the cops in that moment, but the kid was having so much fun. I also didn't want to traumatize him. If I was terrified, I didn't even want to know how the kid would feel. The thought was also still lingering in my mind that maybe this woman knew or was related to them somehow. I didn't want to take the chance though, especially after her sketchy demeanor. When we got to the ice cream shop, I texted the boy's mother immediately. I told her everything that happened. I was looking over my shoulder constantly, trying to make sure we hadn't been followed. The mother called the police, which made me feel better. The mother and the cop met us at the ice cream place. We never did tell her son what happened. We just played off that the officer was a friend of his mother's. I stepped away and gave the officer a description of the woman. After receiving this description, the mother was horrified. She didn't recognize the woman at all. She went and stayed with her own mother for a few weeks after, but they've since moved back into that house. They never caught that random woman as far as I know. And as far as she knows, nobody ever tried to break in again. She bought cameras for the house, and she's actively thinking about moving. The nightmare of that woman is too much for her to handle. Months later, she still thanks me all the time for handling the situation like I did. As much as she would have liked for me to call the police and have them catch the woman, she appreciated that I thought about her son's well-being first and foremost. I still have nightmares all the time now, thinking about her demented face looking through the window. Even though the mom appreciates what I did, I feel guilt about the situation. I feel like I should have just called the authorities. Then what would they have done though? Maybe they would have just confronted the woman and let her go. I'm just happy the boy is all right, and I hope that woman never comes back again. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.